Dr. James Mitchell was a man who believed in things he could measure. At 43, he was one of the most respected veterinarians in Iowa. A man who could diagnose a horse's colic from a twitch in its flank, or a dog's cancer from the tone of its bark. His life was built on the solid bedrock of science, biology, chemistry, anatomy. If it couldn't be seen under a microscope or detected by a blood test, James didn't have time for it. He was a healer of bodies, a mechanic of flesh and bone. But there was one patient James couldn't heal.
The embrace
himself.
Releases
For 12
fast.
years, James had been fighting a losing war against his own body. It started in 1982 with a strange fatigue that coffee couldn't touch. Then came the joint pain, a deep, grinding ache that felt like glass in his knuckles. Then the inflammation that migrated from his lungs to his kidneys like a restless ghost. He had seen the best specialists at the Mayo Clinic. He had piles of medical files 3 inches thick. The diagnosis was always vague. Undifferentiated autoimmune disorder, a fancy way of saying his body was attacking itself. And nobody knew why James lived in a state of chronic, quiet desperation. He spent his days saving animals with precise medical interventions, and his nights collapsing onto his couch, too in pain to cook dinner. He felt betrayed. He felt betrayed by science, which offered him only steroids and painkillers that dulled his mind. And secretly, he felt betrayed by God. James wasn't a religious fanatic, but he had grown up in the church. He had prayed. Oh, how he had prayed in the beginning. "I heal your creatures," he would whisper to the ceiling in the dark. "Why won't you heal me?" The silence that answered him was more painful than the arthritis. It solidified his cynicism. He decided that the universe was a cold, mechanical place where biology malfunctioned at random, and miracles were just fairy tales for people who couldn't handle the math. But on a freezing night in December, the math changed. James was closing up his clinic late. The snow was falling heavy and fast, burying the Iowa cornfields in white silence. He was walking to his truck, his joints screaming in the cold, when he saw it. A shape huddled near the dumpster behind the clinic. At first, he thought it was a wounded dog, maybe a stray hit by a car. His instinct kicked in, the instinct to heal. He grabbed his medical bag and rushed over. But it wasn't a dog. It was Kyle, or at least, that's the name the entity later used. The figure was humanoid, but wrong. Too tall, too thin. The skin was a pale, translucent grey that seemed to absorb the snow rather than reflect it. And it was bleeding a thick, violet fluid that steamed in the cold air. James froze. His scientific mind tried to categorize what he was seeing: deformity, genetic mutation, burn victim. But when the entity turned its head and looked at him, James knew. The eyes were large, dark, and filled with an intelligence that was ancient and terrifyingly calm. There was no fear in those eyes, only a profound, patient, waiting. James should have run. He should have called the police. But he didn't. He was a doctor, and this was a patient in distress. He knelt down in the snow. "I can help," James stammered, his breath clouding in the air. I have sutures. I have morphine." The entity reached out a slender hand and touched James's wrist. It wasn't a physical grip. It was a mental connection. A voice flooded James's mind, clear, resonant, and devoid of any human accent. "Your medicine is crude, doctor," the alien projected. "Chemicals, knives, bandages. You treat the hardware, but you ignore the software." James watched in shock as the deep gash on the alien's chest began to close. It didn't stitch itself. It simply ... rewove. The tissue knit together like a time-lapse video of a flower blooming. It was impossible. It defied every law of cellular biology James knew. You look for miracles, the entity continued, sensing James's awe. But what you just saw is not magic. It is technology. It is the physics of love. I have come to answer the question you ask your ceiling, James. You want to know why you are sick. You want to know why your God does not heal you. It is because you have forgotten the technology. The man you call Jesus was not a magician, the alien revealed. He was a master physician. He brought a medical technology to this planet that was so advanced, your ancestors mistook it for religion. He taught that love is a frequency. He taught that forgiveness is a surgery. And you have been trying to run a high-voltage system on a low-voltage battery. This video is the story of that night. It is the story of how a cynical veterinarian learned that his autoimmune disease wasn't a biological error, but a spiritual signal. It is the revelation that the miracles of the Bible are actually a lost medical science that is dormant in your own DNA. If you are sick, if you are tired of being a patient, and if you are ready to learn how to be your own physician using the most powerful energy in the universe, then subscribe. The doctor is in to understand the magnitude of the revelation James Mitchell was about to receive. You first have to understand the fortress he had built around his mind. James was not a mystic. He was a man of the microscope. He lived in a world of cause and effect. If a cow was sick, it was because of bacteria, a virus, or a toxin. You found the cause, you applied the antidote, and the system reset. It was clean. It was logical, but for the last 12 years, James's own body had defied logic. It began innocently enough, a stiffness in his fingers when he woke up, a fatigue that felt like he was walking through water. He ignored it. He was 31, in the prime of his life. But the body keeps the score, and James's body was losing by 35. He was seeing a rheumatologist every month. The diagnosis was a moving target. First it was rheumatoid arthritis, then lupus, then fibromyalgia. Finally, they settled on undifferentiated connective tissue disease. It was a medical shrug. It meant, we know your immune system is destroying your joints and organs, but we don't know why, and we don't know how to stop it. James took the pills. He took the prednisone that made his face swell and his temper short. He took the methotrexate that made his hair thin and his stomach turn. He did everything the science told him to do, and every morning he woke up in pain. The irony was cruel. James was a brilliant healer. In his clinic, he performed miracles. He pinned shattered bones in cats that had fallen from trees. He brought calves back from the brink of death. Animals loved him. They sensed his competence and his gentle hands. But when the clinic lights went out and James drove home to his empty apartment, the healer vanished. He became a cripple. His marriage had dissolved 5 years ago. His wife, Sarah, hadn't left because he was sick. She left because he was absent. The pain made him withdraw. He stopped going to dinners. He stopped traveling. He built a wall of silence around his suffering because he hated being pitied. He hated being the patient. He was Dr. Mitchell. He was the one who fixed things. Being broken felt like a failure of character, and in the dark, quiet corners of his mind, a deep, corrosive anger began to form. It wasn't just anger at the disease. It was anger at the divine. James looked at the universe and saw a breach of contract. I dedicated my life to relieving suffering, he would think bitterly. I have saved thousands of your creatures. Is this my reward? To decay by inches. He stopped praying. Prayer felt like begging a brick wall. He replaced God with science, but now even science was failing him. He was trapped in a burning building, and the firefighters were just standing outside taking notes on the temperature of the flames. Back in the alley, the entity named Kyle stood up. The snow around his feet had melted, revealing the steam rising from his boots. The wound on his chest was gone, not scarred, simply gone. James stared at the alien's chest, his medical mind reeling. How, he whispered. That was deep tissue trauma. You regenerated muscle, skin, and vascular systems in seconds. That requires massive energy. That requires stem cells, acceleration. It's impossible. It is impossible for chemistry, Kyle corrected. It is standard procedure for consciousness. The alien stepped closer. He didn't look like a victim anymore. He looked like a professor inspecting a student. I have scanned your biology, Dr. Kyle projected. It is fascinating. You are a walking civil war. James bristled. I have an autoimmune condition. My genetics are flawed. Your genetics are responding to a command, Kyle said. Your body is not making a mistake. It is following orders. The immune system is a soldier. It attacks the enemy. In your case, the soldier has been told that you are the enemy. That's a metaphor, James snapped, his patience fraying. I don't need metaphors. I need a cure. My T cells are overactive. It's a biological glitch. There are no glitches in the living system, Kyle stated calmly. Only feedback loops. Look at the energy, James. Look deeper than the microscope. The alien raised a hand, and for a moment, James's vision shifted. It was as if a filter had been removed from his eyes. He looked at his own hands. Instead of skin and bone, he saw a swirling field of light, but the light wasn't clear. Around his joints, around his chest, there were dark, jagged knots of energy. They looked like tangled wire. They vibrated with a low, dissonant hum. That Kyle pointed to the dark knots is crystallized anger. You carry a deep resentment, James. You are angry at your wife for leaving. You are angry at the doctors for failing you. But mostly, you are angry at yourself. You hate your body for being weak. You hate your dependency. Every time you swallow a pill, you send a signal of disgust to your own cells. Every time you struggle to open a jar, you curse your own hands. Your cells are listening, the entity revealed. Your immune system hears the command. This body is a failure. This body is the source of my pain. Attack it, and so it obeys. You are not sick because of a virus, doctor. You are sick because you have been unconsciously commanding your body to commit suicide for 12 years. James staggered back against the dumpster. The accusation hit him harder than the cold. He wanted to deny it. He wanted to scream that he loved life, that he wanted to live, but the memory surfaced. The morning he couldn't button his shirt. He had looked in the mirror and screamed, "I hate you," at his own reflection. He remembered the disgust he felt when he looked at his swollen knuckles. He remembered the shame. I just want to be normal," James whispered. "I don't want to hurt." "Then you must stop the war," Kyle said. "You treat animals with love. You touch them with compassion. But you touch yourself with judgment. You cannot heal a body you despise, James. It is physically impossible. The medicine you need is not in your bag," the alien said, Gesturing to the medical kit James had dropped in the snow. "The medicine is resonance, and I can teach you how to make it." "Jesus of Nazareth did not use morphine," Carl added, a strange light entering his eyes. "He used the frequency of union. He reconnected the patient to the source. Do you want to learn the physics of the miracle? Or do you want to go back to your pills?" James looked at the medical bag. Then he looked at the alien who had just regenerated a mortal wound in 10 seconds. The scientist in him was terrified, but the patient in him, the desperate, lonely patient, saw a door opening. "Teach me," James said. James unlocked the back door of his clinic and ushered the entity inside. The fluorescent lights flickered on, illuminating the exam room's stainless steel tables, cabinets full of pharmaceuticals, charts of canine anatomy on the walls. It was James's sanctuary of logic. But as Kyle stepped into the room, the logic seemed to warp. The alien was taller than James realized, nearly 7 feet, and his presence seemed to make the air vibrate, like standing next to a high-voltage transformer. "Sit here," James commanded, his doctor's instinct overriding his fear. He pointed to the large metal exam table. Kyle sat. He moved with a fluidity that was unnerving. There was no wasted motion, no hesitation. James grabbed a digital thermometer and a stethoscope, habits dying hard. He approached the entity, but as he moved the stethoscope toward the grey chest, the device shrieked with static feedback. "Your sensors are calibrated for chemical biology," Kyle projected, his mental voice echoing slightly in the tiled room. "They cannot read a bioelectric field of this intensity. Put them away, doctor. Look with your eyes." James lowered the stethoscope. He looked at the spot where the wound had been, the deep gash that should have required 20 stitches and a drain. The skin was smooth, pale, pearlescent, and absolutely flawless. There was no scar tissue, no inflammation. It was as if the injury had been erased from the timeline. "This violates the second law of thermodynamics," James muttered, running a hand through his thinning hair. "You can't create order from chaos without energy input. You didn't eat. You didn't take medicine. Where did the energy come from to knit those cells back together?" "The energy came from the field," Kyle replied, "and the instruction came from the mind." The alien looked around the room, studying the shelves of antibiotics and painkillers. "You treat the body as if it is a stupid machine, James. You think the cells are dumb bricks that need to be mortared by external chemicals. This is the mistake of your medicine. The cell is not a brick. It is a conscious soldier. Every cell in your body has a consciousness. It listens. It waits for orders. When I was injured, I did not panic. I did not fear the pain. I entered a state of coherence. I spoke to the cellular structure. I reminded it of its original template. And because there was no resistance, no fear, no doubt, the cells obeyed instantly. They returned to the blueprint." James stared at him. "You talk to your wound." "I commanded it with love," Kyle corrected. "Not the emotion you feel for a puppy, but the frequency of integration. I loved the wound back into wholeness." James pulled up a stool and sat down, his knees aching. The contrast was stark. The alien, glowing with health after a mortal wound, and the doctor, crumbling from chronic pain despite his medical degree. "Why me?" James asked, his voice heavy with exhaustion. "You could have walked into a hospital. Why a vet clinic in the middle of nowhere?" "Because you are a healer who has lost his faith in healing," Kyle said softly. "And because you possess a rare combination, a scientific mind that demands proof, and a broken heart that demands meaning. I scanned the local population before I approached. The entity revealed. Most humans are closed loops. They loop fear, they loop hunger, they loop distraction. Your signal was different. You were broadcasting a frequency of desperate compassion. You care for these animals with a purity that is rare, but you block that compassion when it comes to yourself. You are a conduit that is clogged at the output. James looked at his hands, swollen, red, painful. I have an autoimmune disease, he said, the label feeling like a shield. My body attacks itself. It's not a choice. It's a malfunction. It is dissonance, Kyle countered. Imagine an orchestra, James. Your cells are the musicians. They are capable of playing a perfect symphony of health. But the conductor you is screaming. You are screaming frustration. You are screaming resentment. You are screaming, I am broken. The musicians are confused. They hear the scream, and they play chaos. They attack the instruments. The disease is not the musician's fault. It is the conductor's instructions. So it's my fault. James snapped, the old anger rising. I'm doing this to myself. Fault is a useless concept, the alien said calmly. It is about responsibility. You did not know you were the conductor. You thought you were just the audience. I am here to put the baton back in your hand. James scoffed, standing up to pace the room. This sounds like faith healing, like the tent revivals my grandmother dragged me to. Just believe and you'll be healed. I've seen kids die of cancer while their parents prayed over them. I've seen good people suffer. If belief was enough, the hospitals would be empty. Belief is weak, Kyle agreed unexpectedly. Belief is just a thought. I am talking about knowing. I am talking about technology. The alien leaned forward. You mentioned Jesus of Nazareth earlier. You think of him as a religious figure, a magic man who broke the rules of nature. This is why you cannot duplicate his results. You think he was a god, and you are a worm. Let me reframe the data for you, Kyle said, his eyes locking onto James. Jesus was not a god in the sense of being separate from you. He was a starseed. He was an advanced consciousness who chose to incarnate in a human biological vessel. He came from a civilization that had mastered the consciousness-matter interface millions of years ago. Think of him as a prototype. Kyle used a scientific metaphor. Imagine you drop a modern smartphone into the year 1800. The people there would think it is magic. They would worship it. They would build shrines to the glowing screen, but they would not understand how to use it to make a call. They would stare at the hardware and miss the software. Jesus came to show humanity what the human instrument is capable of when it is running at 100% efficiency. He walked on water not to show off, but to demonstrate that the frequency of the body can be raised above the density of matter. He healed the sick not to be a savior, but to be a teacher. He said, "These things I do, you shall do also." He was giving you the user manual for your own biology. James stopped pacing. The user manual, he repeated. So, ... The miracles, ... were applications of high-frequency physics. Kyle finished the sentence. When Jesus touched a leper, he did not beg God to fix the man. He simply stood in front of the man and vibrated at the frequency of absolute health. He held that frequency so strongly, with such focused intention, that the leper's chaotic field had no choice but to synchronize. It is called entrainment. The stronger magnet aligns the weaker magnet. But the church hid this, Kyle said. a sadness entering his tone. They told you he was the only one who could do it. They took away your baton and told you to pay them to conduct the orchestra. They turned a science of self-mastery into a religion of dependency. And that is why you are sick, doctor. You are waiting for a pill or a prayer to fix you, when the power to rewrite your own DNA is sitting right behind your eyes. James looked at the medical charts on the wall diagrams of muscles, bones, and nerves. He realized they were just maps of the hardware. They said nothing about the electricity that ran the machine. Love, James whispered, remembering what the alien said in the alley. You said love is the technology. It is the carrier wave, Kyle said. And it is the only frequency that can penetrate the wall you have built around your heart. James leaned back against the counter, his mind struggling to bridge the gap between his medical training and the alien's words. Love, he repeated, the word tasting like ash in his mouth. You're talking about love as if it's a drug, as if I can put it in a syringe. But love is an emotion, Kyle. It's a chemical reaction, dopamine, oxytocin, serotonin. It's evolution's way of keeping us from killing each other. It doesn't rebuild tissue. That is the biological reaction to the signal, Kyle corrected, his mental voice sharp as a scalpel. Do not confuse the music with the radio. Your hormones are just the receiver. The signal itself, that is something far more fundamental. The alien stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the blizzard. In your physics, you have 4 fundamental forces: gravity, electromagnetism, strong nuclear, and weak nuclear. You think these are separate. They are not. They are all expressions of a single binding agent. In my language, we call this agent the unified field. In your religious language, you call it love. Kyle turned back to James. Love is not a sentiment, Doctor. It is the force of connection. It is the gravity that holds the electron to the nucleus. It is the magnetism that keeps the planets in orbit. Without this frequency of attraction, the universe would fly apart into chaos. Disease is simply a local loss of this gravity. It is a cell forgetting that it belongs to the whole. It is biological isolation. James rubbed his aching knuckles. Okay, he said, trying to follow the logic. So love is gravity. It binds things. But how does that fix an autoimmune disease? How does that stop my body from attacking itself? Because there are 2 types of love, Kyle explained. And you only know the weak version. You know conditional love. I love you if you are good. I love you if you give me what I want. This is a transaction. It pulses. It fluctuates. It is an alternating current, AC. It creates friction. It creates heat. It is unstable. But Jesus taught unconditional love. This is a direct current, DC. It is a steady, high-voltage stream that does not waver based on the behavior of the object. It says, I acknowledge your existence. I validate your oneness with me. No matter what, here is the medical application, James. Unconditional love is a superconductor. The entity projected a holographic image of a nerve fiber. It looked frayed, inflamed like James's own nerves. When you look at your sick body with judgment, Kyle said, when you say I hate this pain, you create resistance. In an electrical circuit, resistance creates heat. It blocks the flow. Your anger is literally increasing the electrical resistance in your nervous system, preventing the healing signal from the brain to the tissue. But when you apply unconditional love, when you look at the pain and say, I accept you, I hold you, the resistance drops to 0. You become a superconductor. The energy from the source, the energy that builds worlds, can suddenly flow through you without obstruction. And when that much energy hits a sick cell, the cell has only two choices. It either evolves back to health or it dissolves. It cannot stay sick in a high voltage field. James looked at his hands. He imagined the anger he held, the resistance. He realized he had been squeezing the hose while demanding water. So the miracles, ... James whispered. Jesus wasn't just being nice to people. He was blasting them with zero resistance energy, Kyle confirmed. When he looked at a blind man, he didn't see a broken beggar. He saw a perfect being. He held the frequency of wholeness so intensely that the blind man's biology had to match it. He used love as a laser, not a candle. The alien moved closer to James, invading his personal space. The heat radiating from the entity was immense, soothing. "Let us apply this to your war, Doctor," Kyle said. "You have an autoimmune disease. Your immune system, the Defense Department, is attacking the civilian population, your joints." "Why?" James shook his head. "Science says it's a mistake." "Molecular mimicry." "It is not a mistake," Kyle said. "It is a response to For 40 years, you have judged yourself. You judged yourself for not being smart enough, then for not being a good enough husband, and now for not being healthy enough. You look in the mirror and you broadcast a signal of disgust. Your immune system hears this signal. It thinks, the master hates this body. This body must be the enemy. We must destroy it to please the master. You are killing yourself with your own thoughts. James, you are the commander-in-chief of a genocide against your own cells." The words tore through James's defenses. He thought of the divorce. Sarah had said, "You don't let anyone in, James. Not even yourself." She was right. He had walled himself off. He had treated his body like a rental car he was disappointed with. "How do I stop it?" James asked, his voice cracking. "I don't know how to love this. It hurts too much." "You do not start by loving the pain," Kyle said gently. "That is too advanced. You start by forgiving the failure. Forgiveness is not a moral act, James. It is a technical one. It is the act of unclamping the hose. It is the act of stopping the signal of enemy so the immune system can stand down. Jesus said, 'Your sins are forgiven. Rise and walk.' He did not mean God isn't mad at you anymore. He meant, release the guilt that is paralyzing your legs. Drop the heavy bag you are carrying. The energy you are using to punish yourself is the same energy you need to walk. Reallocate it." The alien extended a hand. "I can show you the protocol, but you must be willing to do something you have never done. You must be willing to treat yourself with the same tenderness you gave that golden retriever last week." James looked at the alien's hand. It was an invitation to step off the cliff of science and fall into something vast and unknown. But the pain in his knees was a constant reminder that the cliff was the only way out. "Show me," James said. "Show me the protocol." James cleared the stainless steel exam table, pushing aside the boxes of gauze and syringes. He felt foolish, like a student showing up to a physics exam with a crayon. But the pain in his hips was a sharp, grinding reminder that his crayon methods had failed. "Okay," James said, leaning against the counter to take the weight off his joints. "I'm ready. You said my disease is a dissonance. Explain the pathology. How does a thought turn into inflammation? How does self-hatred become a high C-reactive protein count?" Kyle stood in the center of the room. He didn't use a whiteboard. He raised a hand, and the air between them shimmered. A three-dimensional projection of a human body appeared James's body. It wasn't an X-ray or an MRI, it was a flowchart of light. We must begin with energy anatomy, Kyle projected. You were taught that the physical body produces consciousness, like a generator produces electricity. This is backward. Consciousness produces the body. The body is the printout. Consciousness is the software. Look here, Kyle pointed to the glowing red clusters around James's joints and kidneys. This is what you call inflammation. But look closer. What is fueling the heat? James squinted. The red areas weren't just hot. They were vibrating with a jagged, erratic rhythm. They looked like static on a television screen. That is crystallized emotion, Kyle explained. In a healthy system, the alien lecturer began. Emotion is simply energy in motion. It is a wave. It arises, it flows through the nervous system, it delivers a message, and it leaves. Anger is a wave of fire. Grief is a wave of water. If you let them flow, they leave no trace. But you, James, you do not let them flow. You were taught that men do not cry. You were taught that anger is unprofessional. So when your wife left, when you felt the crushing weight of failure, you clenched. You built a dam. Kyle gestured to the hologram. The flow of light in the chest area hit a wall and stopped. It swirled, thickened, and turned dark. When emotional energy is stopped, it does not vanish. It violates the law of conservation of energy to think it disappears. It condenses. It turns from a wave into a particle. It becomes heavy. It settles into the tissue like silt in a river. This silt, Kyle pointed to the kidneys, is toxic. It has a frequency. The frequency of resentment is extremely acidic to biological tissue. It vibrates at a rate that disrupts cellular signaling. The cells in that area stop receiving instructions from the brain. They go rogue. They start to decay. James stared at the hologram. He remembered the year of the divorce. He remembered swallowing the rage, pushing it down into his gut so he could keep working. He thought he was being strong. So the inflammation. James whispered, connecting the dots. It's not random. It is the physical manifestation of a screaming memory, Kyle said. Your kidneys are holding the grief you refuse to cry. Your joints are holding the rigidity of your stubbornness. You stiffened your mind, and so your body stiffened to match it. As within, so without. And now, the autoimmune mechanism, the entity continued, moving to the core of the mystery. Why does the body attack itself? The immune system is a pattern recognition software. It looks for self and not self. It protects the self and destroys the not self. But for 12 years, James, you have been broadcasting a specific thought loop. I am not good enough. I am broken. I hate this weakness. You have psychologically rejected your own existence. The immune system hears this broadcast. It interprets your self-judgment as a command. The master has identified this tissue as enemy. It is simply following your orders. It is trying to excise the part of you that you have condemned. You are not sick because your body is stupid. You are sick because your body is obedience. James felt the blood drain from his face. It was the most horrifying diagnosis he had ever heard, and yet the most logical. He had treated his body like a whipping boy. I did this, James said, his voice trembling. I turned the gun on myself. You did not know the gun was loaded, Kyle said gently. But now you do. And now we must unload it. This brings us to the medicine. Kyle swiped his hand, and the hologram changed. The angry red clusters turned into grey, knotted ropes. "You need to remove the blockage," the alien said. "In surgery, you would cut it out. In energy medicine, we dissolve it. The solvent is called forgiveness." James sighed, rubbing his face. "We're back to church. I've tried forgiving Kyle. I've said the words. I forgive Sarah for leaving. I forgive my dad for being hard on me. It didn't change my blood work. Because you treated forgiveness as a moral act," Kyle corrected. "You thought you were being nice. You thought you were letting them off the hook. True forgiveness has nothing to do with morality. It is a technical release process. It is the act of deleting a corrupted file from the hard drive so the CPU can run again." Kyle leaned in, his violet eyes intense. "The Aramaic word that Jesus used for sin is kota. It is an archery term. It simply means to miss the mark. It implies an error in trajectory, not a wicked heart. And the word for forgive means to untie the knot. When Jesus said, 'Son, your sins are forgiven,' he was not acting as a judge. He was acting as a technician. He was saying, the error in your energy field is corrected. The knot is untied. The flow is restored. You must stop seeing forgiveness as something you do for Sarah," Kyle insisted. "Sarah is gone. She is fine. You must do it for your kidneys. You must do it for your knees. Every moment you hold on to the resentment, you are actively recreating the knot in your tissue. You are waking up every morning and retyping the code for inflammation." James looked at his hands, the tools of his trade. He realized he had been holding them in a fist for a decade. "How do I do it?" James asked. "How do I untie the knot? I don't know how to let go. The anger feels like it's part of my bones now." "We use the laser," Kyle said. "We use the frequency of love. But first, you must identify the target. You must find the deepest knot. It is not Sarah, the entity revealed. It is not your father. Who is the person you judge most harshly, James? Who is the person you have never forgiven for being human?" James closed his eyes. The answer rose up instantly, bitter and undeniable. "Me," he whispered. "I haven't forgiven myself." "For what?" Kyle pressed. "For failing," James said, the tears finally starting to leak out. "For failing my marriage, for getting sick, for being weak, for not being the man I thought I was supposed to be." "There it is," Kyle said softly. "That is the tumor. That is the sin. You have condemned James Mitchell to a life of punishment for the crime of being imperfect. Tonight, we commute the sentence. Tonight, we untie the knot." Kyle walked to the exam table and patted the surface. "Lie down, doctor. It is time for surgery, but we will not use a scalpel. We will use your breath and your attention. I am going to teach you the Christ protocol." James lay back on the cold steel of the exam table, the fluorescent lights buzzing above him like distant insects. He felt exposed, ridiculous, and terrified. He was a man of science, lying on his own operating table, about to perform surgery with nothing but his mind. Kyle stood at the head of the table, placing his long, cool hands on James's temples. He didn't press down. He simply made contact, creating a circuit. "Close your eyes," the entity commanded, his voice vibrating through James's skull. "The first step is coherence. Your brain is noisy. It is in beta waves, fight or flight. We need to shift it to alpha. We need to bring the conductor to the podium." "Breathe," Kyle instructed. "But do not just suck air. Breathe consciously. Imagine the breath entering through the center of your chest, directly into the heart. Hold it for 4 seconds. Release it for 4 seconds. You are not just oxygenating blood. You are synchronizing the rhythm of your heart with the rhythm of your brain. You are tuning the instrument. James followed the instruction. In, 2, 3, 4. Out, 2, 3, 4. Slowly, the frantic racing of his thoughts began to slow down. The sharp edge of the pain in his joints dulled slightly, retreating into the background. He felt a strange heaviness in his limbs, a sign that the nervous system was switching from defense to repair. Good, Kyle whispered. Now, we locate the knot. Move your attention, your inner eye, down into your body. Do not look with your anatomy knowledge. Look with your feeling. Scan your body. Where is the density? Where is the dark star? James scanned his internal landscape. He felt the dull ache in his knees, the burning in his hands. But then, deeper, behind his stomach, wrapped around his spine near the kidneys, he felt it. A cold, hard tightness. It felt like a clenched fist of lead. It was the place where he held his fear. It was the place where he held the divorce, the failure, the shame. I found it, James whispered. It's in my lower back. It feels ... heavy. That is the target, Kyle said. That is the crystallized anger. Now, James, this is the critical moment. Your instinct is to attack it. Your instinct is to say, go away, pain. But if you fight it, you feed it. You must do the opposite. You must thank it. James's eyes snapped open for a second. Thank it. It's destroying me. Close your eyes, Kyle commanded. It is not destroying you. It is holding the toxicity so the rest of your body can survive. That knot has been carrying your burden for 12 years. It is a loyal soldier protecting the castle. Acknowledge its service. Say to it, I see you. I know you are trying to help. Thank you for carrying this for me. But you can put it down now. James hesitated. It felt counterintuitive. It went against every war metaphor of modern medicine, but he was tired of fighting. He focused his attention on the cold, not in his back. He thought about how tired his body must be from carrying all this anger. A wave of genuine pity washed over him. I see you, he thought, directing the words to his own kidneys. I'm sorry I hated you. Thank you for holding on. And then, the shift happened. The moment James stopped resisting the pain and started witnessing it with compassion, the knot loosened. It was a physical sensation, like a cramp suddenly releasing. Now, Kyle said, his voice rising in intensity. The channel is open. Fire the laser. Do not think love. Feel gratitude. Remember the feeling you have when you save a puppy. Remember the feeling of the sun on your face after a long winter. Find that frequency in your heart. Amplify it. Make it bright. Make it hot. James thought of the day he saved a golden retriever named Buster. He remembered the look in the dog's eyes, pure, unconditional trust. He felt that warmth swell in his chest. It started as a spark, then grew into a flame. Direct it, Kyle commanded. Send that feeling down your spine. Pour it into the knot. Wash the gray area with golden light. Do not try to fix it. Just love it. James visualized the light pouring from his heart down his spine. It hit the cold knot in his back. He expected nothing to happen. Instead, he gasped. Heat, intense, physical heat exploded in his lower back. It didn't burn. It vibrated. It felt like warm water rushing through a frozen pipe. He could feel the circulation returning, the capillaries dilation, the energy rushing into the tissue that had been starved for a decade. Tears streamed down his cheeks, not tears of sadness, but tears of relief. The dam had broken. The chemical structure of the crystallized emotion was dissolving under the high-frequency bombardment of his own gratitude. For the first time in 12 years, the grinding noise in his knee, RVA system went silent. Keep breathing, Kyle guided. Let it flow. You are rewriting the code. You are telling the immune system, the war is over. Stand down. Return to baseline. James lay there for 10 minutes, bathing his own body in this strange, powerful light. He felt the inflammation receding, not chemically, but energetically. The swelling in his knuckles seemed to deflate. The air in his lungs felt deeper. When he finally opened his eyes, the room looked brighter. The colors were sharper. He sat up. He moved his hands. The stiffness was gone. Not fully healed, but the active burning attack had stopped. He was in remission, and he had done it in 20 minutes. James looked at his hands, turning them over in the light. He looked at Kyle, who was standing back, watching with a satisfied expression. "Why?" James whispered, his voice trembling with a mix of awe and rage. "Why doesn't everyone know this? This is biology. This is physics. Why isn't this in the medical textbooks? Why do we have hospitals full of people dying of energy blockages when we could teach them this in an hour?" Kyle walked to the counter and picked up a bottle of painkillers. He rattled the pills. "Because this," he said, holding the bottle, "is a business model. And what you just did is a revolution." The aliens set the bottle down. "Think about the economics, James. If every human being realized they had a pharmacy inside their own chest, who would buy the drugs?" "No," Kyle corrected, standing up to leave. "I showed you the map. You walked the path. You saved yourself, Doctor. And now you know the secret. The kingdom of heaven is not a place. It is a frequency. And you have found the dial." James walked Kyle to the back door. The alien shipper, small, sleek craft that hovered silently over the cornfield, was waiting. "What happens now?" James asked. "Do I tell the world? Do I call the Mayo Clinic?" "They will not listen," Kyle said. "Not yet. They are invested in the old model. If you tell them aliens taught you to heal with love, they will lock you up. You must be smarter. You must be a bridge. Continue your practice," the entity instructed, "but change the method. Use the drugs when necessary, but infuse them with intention. Touch your patients with the frequency. Heal the owners as you heal the pets. Be a witness, not a preacher. The future of medicine is coming, James. A time is coming when hospitals will be sanctuaries of light, where doctors are trained in energy as well as anatomy. You are the pioneer. You are the first seed." Kyle paused on the ramp of the ship. "And remember," the alien said, looking back one last time, "Jesus was not the exception. He was the example. The only difference between him and you is that he never forgot who he was. Now neither will you." The ship shot up into the night sky, a streak of violet light that vanished into the stars. James stood in the snow. He was alone again. But for the first time in his life, he didn't feel lonely. He felt connected to everything: the snow, the stars, the sleeping town. He felt the hum of the universe in his own bones. He walked back into his clinic. He picked up his stethoscope. It was just a tool, but in his hands, it was now an instrument of the divine. He turned off the lights. He had a busy day tomorrow. There were a lot of knots to untie. The story of Dr. James Mitchell is not just a miracle in a cornfield. It is a blueprint for the future of human evolution. James went back to his work, but he was no longer just a veterinarian. He became a bridge. To the outside world, he was still the man in the white coat who prescribed antibiotics and set broken bones. But beneath the surface, he was practicing a new kind of medicine. When he touched an animal, he didn't just check for tumors. He checked for the signal. When he spoke to an owner, he didn't just ask about diet. He asked about the emotional atmosphere of the home. He understood that the dog's anxiety was often a reflection of the owner's stress, and that true healing required treating the entire system. He became a witness to the truth that the alien, Kyle, had revealed. The separation between spirit and science is an illusion. For centuries, we have been told to choose. If you are sick, go to the doctor. If you are sad, go to the priest. We chopped the human being in half, treating the body like a car and the soul like a ghost. And the result? A world full of technologically advanced hospitals filled with people who are chronically spiritually sick. But the secret is out. Love is not a poetic sentiment. It is the most advanced medical technology in the universe. It is the frequency that tells your DNA to repair itself. It is the signal that commands your immune system to stand down or stand up. It is the superconductor that allows the energy of the source to flow through your biological wires without resistance. You watching this video right now, you likely have a knot somewhere in your body. Maybe it's a chronic back pain. Maybe it's a stomach issue. Maybe it's a fatigue you can't shake. You have been to the doctors. You have taken the pills. You have done everything the hardware manual told you to do. But you are still hurting. Why? Because you are trying to fix a software problem with a screwdriver. You are trying to heal a body you secretly despise. You cannot hate yourself into health. You cannot judge yourself into wholeness. The lesson James learned is the lesson for all of us. The symptom is not the enemy. The symptom is the messenger. Your pain is not trying to kill you. It is trying to tell you that you have disconnected from the frequency of love. It is begging you to stop the war. It is begging you to forgive. So here is your prescription. It doesn't come from a pharmacy. It comes from the stars. I challenge you to try the Christ protocol. Next time you feel pain, do not immediately reach for the bottle. Pause, close your eyes, go to the pain, and instead of fighting it, say, thank you. Say, I love you. I forgive you. I am listening. Use your breath to untie the knot. Use your intention to bathe that area in golden light. See what happens when you stop being the commander of the war and start being the gardener of your own body. You do not need to wait for a spaceship to land in your backyard. The technology is already installed. It came standard with your birth. You just forgot the password. The password is compassion. If you are tired of being a patient and ready to become a physician, if you are ready to take back your authority over your own biology, then join us. We are building a community of self-heal. We are proving that the human body is not a fragile machine, but a miraculous vessel of light. Subscribe to this channel, not for entertainment, but for education. We will continue to uncover the lost files of human potential, and I want you to make a declaration to your cells, to your immune system, and to the universe. Go to the comments right now and write, "I am the healer." Let your body hear you. Let the world see you. Let the industry know that we are waking up. I am the narrator. The doctor is out. You are in. Be whole. If every person realized they could talk directly to the source and heal their own sin, who would pay the tithe? The suppression of this knowledge was not an accident, Kyle revealed, his tone darkening. It was a strategic necessity for the controllers. 2,000 years ago, the empire, both the Roman Empire and the religious empire, realized that Jesus was dangerous, not because he was a Messiah, but because he was a liberator. He was teaching people self-sovereignty. He was teaching them that the temple was inside them. You cannot rule a population that knows it is divine, Carl explained. You cannot sell salvation to a man who knows he is already whole. So, they had to hijack the message. They couldn't erase Jesus, so they did something smarter. They deified him. James frowned. Deified him. But he was special. They put him on a pedestal so high that you couldn't reach him, Kyle said. They turned him into a god to be worshipped, rather than a teacher to be emulated. They told you his miracles were proof of his unique divinity, not demonstrations of your own potential. They said, only Jesus can do this. You are just a sinner. You need us to talk to him for you. They severed the link. The entity continued. They told you the power was outside of you, in the pill, in the priest, in the altar. They created a civilization of dependence. Look at your world, James. You are addicted to external solutions. You look for health in a bottle. You look for peace in a bank account. You look for God in a building. You have given away your authority. The resurrection, Kyle added, was the final demonstration. Jesus showed that consciousness is superior to matter. He showed that the spirit can reorganize the flesh even after death. It was the ultimate proof of mind over matter, but the church turned it into a ghost story. They turned a lesson in advanced physics into a fairy tale about a magic zombie, and they told you that if you believed the story, you would go to heaven. They hid the technology inside the mythology. James looked around his clinic for thousands of dollars of equipment, the drugs, the diplomas. He realized he was part of the machine. He had been trained to fix biological machines, never knowing there was a driver inside. So we've been asleep, James said. For 2,000 years. You have been in a coma, Kyle corrected, induced by those who profit from your slumber. But the sleepers are waking up, James. You are waking up. And now that you know the protocol, you have a choice. You can keep this for yourself, or you can verify it. You can prove that it wasn't just a hallucination. Kyle pointed to the phone on the wall. It was ringing. It was 3 a.m. Answer the phone, Doctor, the alien said. It is your test case. It is time to take this technology out of the laboratory and into the field. James picked up the phone. It was Mrs. Morrison from the ranch down the road. Her voice was frantic. Dr. Mitchell, I know it's late, but it's Belle, the mare. She went down. She's not breathing right. The vet from the county said there's nothing to do, but she's dying. James, can you come? James looked at Kyle. The alien nodded. This was it. The horse wasn't just a patient. It was a skeptic's proof. A horse has no religion. A horse has no placebo effect. If the energy worked on Belle, it was real. I'm coming, James said into the receiver. He hung up and grabbed his bag. But this time, he didn't check for the morphine. He checked his own heart. He checked his frequency. He was bringing a new kind of medicine. James Mitchell stepped into the Morrison barn, shaking the snow from his coat. The air was thick with the smell of hay and the palpable heaviness of sorrow. Mrs. Morrison, an elderly woman with hands toughened by decades of ranch work, was kneeling in the straw next to Belle. Belle was a magnificent quarter horse, but now she looked like a pile of deflated velvet. Her breathing was shallow, ragged. Her eyes were dull, staring at nothing. "She won't get up, James," Mrs. Morrison said, wiping her eyes. "She hasn't eaten in 3 days. Ever since we sold the foal, she just gave up. The other vet said it's colic, but I know. She's heartbroken." James knelt beside the mare. He ran his hands over her flank. His medical training kicked in automatically. Heart rate slow. Temperature dropping. Peristalsis absent. The clinical diagnosis was clear. Systemic shutdown due to stress. In the old days, James would have reached for a syringe of Banamine and a nasogastric tube. He would have tried to force the biology to restart. But tonight, he remembered Kyle's words. You treat the hardware, but you ignore the software. James closed his eyes. He didn't reach for his bag. He placed both hands on the horse's neck. He didn't check for a pulse. He checked for the signal. He quieted his mind, using the breathing technique Kyle had taught him. He shifted his brain waves from the frantic beta of the emergency to the calm alpha of the healer. He reached out with his feelings, asking the question, where is the knot? He felt it instantly. A massive, cold void in the horse's chest. It wasn't a metaphor. It was a palpable frequency of grief. The horse was vibrating at the frequency of loss. She had decided that life without her foal was not worth living, and her cells were obeying that command. They were shutting down the engines. "It's okay, Belle," James whispered, not with his voice, but with his intention. He began the Christ protocol. He summoned the feeling of unconditional love, not pity, but a powerful, commanding gratitude for Belle's life. He visualized a golden light pouring from his heart, down his arms, and into the horse's chest. "I see you," James projected. "I feel your pain. It is valid, but you are still needed here. You are loved. You are whole." For 5 minutes, nothing happened. The wind rattled the barn doors. Mrs. Morrison watched, confused why the doctor wasn't using any medicine. James felt the resistance, the heavy, dark inertia of the grief. It was exhausted. It wanted to die. But James didn't waver. He turned up the voltage. He poured every ounce of his own newfound hope into the animal. He used the entrainment principle. "Match my frequency, Belle. Come up here. It's warm up here." Then a twitch. Belle's ear flicked. She let out a long, deep sigh, a release of breath that sounded like a bag of heavy stones being dropped. The cold void under James's hands began to warm up. He could feel the energy starting to circulate again, unfreezing the gut, jump-starting the heart. Belle lifted her head. She looked at James. Her eyes were no longer dull. They were clear. They held a spark of recognition. She blinked, snorted, and then, with a groan of effort, she pulled her front legs under her. "Oh my God," Mrs. Morrison gasped. Belle stood up. She shook herself, dust flying from her coat. She nudged James's pocket, looking for a treat. She was back. The software had REBOOTED. James stood up, his legs shaky. He looked at his hands. He hadn't used a single drug. He had used the physics of love to reverse a systemic shutdown. It wasn't a miracle. It was a medical procedure, and it worked. James drove back to the clinic in silence. The snow had stopped. The moon was out, turning the fields into a sea of silver. He felt different, lighter. The skepticism that had defined his life for 40 years was gone, replaced by a terrifying sense of possibility. If he could save a horse, what could he do for himself? He pulled into the clinic parking lot. Kyle was waiting inside, sitting in the dark exam room in a meditative posture. James walked in and sat down opposite the alien. "She lived," James said. "Of course she did," Kyle replied, opening his violet eyes. "Animals are easy. They have no ego. They have no story. When you offer them the frequency of healing, they accept it immediately. Humans are harder. You are addicted to your suffering." James looked down at his own hands. The swelling was down, but the ache was still there, a ghost of the old pain. "I'm ready," James said. "I'm ready to finish the surgery." "Then close your eyes," Kyle commanded, "and go to the place you are most afraid of." James went inward. He went back to the knot in his lower back. But this time, he went deeper. He went past the anger at his body. He went to the root. He saw himself at 30 years old, standing in the kitchen while Sarah packed her bags. He felt the shame of not fighting for her. He felt the belief that he was unlovable. "Forgive him," Kyle whispered in his mind. "Forgive the man who didn't know how to love. He was doing his best with the tools he had. He is not guilty. He was just asleep." James looked at that younger version of himself. For 12 years, he had hated that man. He had punished him with inflammation and pain. But now, seeing him through the lens of the Christ's protocol, James just felt ... compassion. "I forgive you," James whispered to himself. "I release you. You don't have to carry this anymore. The trial is over." He felt a click, a physical sensation of something snapping in his spine. And then, the rush. It felt like a dam breaking. A torrent of heat, pure liquid energy rushed up his spine, flooding his kidneys, his lungs, his shoulders, his hands. It was intense, almost painful in its pleasure. He gasped, arching his back. He could feel the cells waking up, the mitochondria firing, the DNA unwinding the commands of illness and rewinding the commands of health. He sat there for an hour, vibrating with the energy of his own resurrection. When he opened his eyes, he was hungry, ravenously hungry. He stood up. His knees didn't creak. His back didn't spasm. He made a fist. It was tight, strong. He wasn't just in remission. He was healed. James looked at Kyle. Tears of gratitude streamed down his face. "Thank you," James said. "You saved my life